You're late, my mom said as she stepped out onto the porch, pulling her suitcase behind her. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. It was 6:02 a.m. 2 minutes late, Mom, I said, forcing a smile. I got out of the car to help with the luggage, but then I saw her, my sister Lauren, emerging from the house with her own suitcase in tow. My smile froze. What's going on? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. My mom turned to me, her expression far too cheerful for the situation. Oh, Violet, we decided Lauren should come instead of you. She's been so stressed lately, and she really needs this trip. My chest tightened. Instead of me? Mom, I've been planning this for years. I paid for everything. She waved her hand dismissively as if I'd just pointed out something trivial. And we're grateful, sweetheart. But you're always working so hard. You can take another trip later. Lauren needs this right now. Lauren didn't even have the decency to look guilty. She just smirked, shifting her weight onto one hip. Thanks for understanding, sis, she said, her tone dripping with fake gratitude. I stared at the two of them, my heart pounding in my chest. My dad shuffled out a moment later, avoiding eye contact as he handed me his suitcase. This is unbelievable, I said, my voice shaking. This was supposed to be our trip, something for me to share with you. Well, it still is, my mom said with a smile. Just with Lauren instead. Don't make this a big deal, Violet. Your sister really needs a break. My name is Violet, and for the past 2 years I've been working overtime, saving every spare penny to give my parents a trip they'd never forget. Flights, luxury hotels, guided tours, I planned every detail down to the last dinner reservation. But as I stood there in my parents' driveway, watching my sister get into the back seat of my car, I realized something I'd been avoiding for years. It didn't matter how much effort I put in. In their eyes, Lauren would always come first. I clenched my jaw, biting back the sharp retort sitting on the tip of my tongue. Instead, I forced a tight smile and opened the trunk. Let's get going then, I said, my voice flat. If they wanted to prioritize her over me, fine. They could go with her. But I wasn't about to let them enjoy it. The drive to the airport was suffocatingly quiet, except for Lauren's incessant chatter. Oh my gosh, Mom, did you see that TikTok about Paris? I can't wait to go shopping there. Do you think we'll have time for that, or will the tours take up the whole day? My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as I stared straight ahead, forcing myself not to say anything. My mom chuckled softly. Of course, we'll have time. We'll figure it out when we get there. I bit the inside of my cheek. When we get there. They didn't even seem to notice I wasn't part of that we anymore. At one point, my dad cleared his throat. Thank you for driving us, Violet. I know this probably feels unusual. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Unusual? That's an interesting way to put it, Dad. He didn't respond. He just shifted uncomfortably in his seat, probably wishing he hadn't spoken at all. Lauren leaned forward from the back seat, her voice grating. You're not mad, right? I mean, this is really big of you letting me go. I could never have afforded this on my own. I clenched my jaw and forced a tight smile. Of course, Lauren. Enjoy the trip. By the time we pulled up to the airport drop-off zone, my patience was hanging by a thread. As I helped unload their luggage, my mom gave me a hug. Thank you for understanding, sweetheart. This means a lot to us, and to Lauren. I nodded stiffly. Sure, Mom. Lauren beamed as she wheeled her suitcase toward the entrance. Thanks, Violet. You're the best. I stood there watching them disappear into the terminal, my chest tight with anger and hurt. The ride back home was a blur. I replayed the conversation in my head over and over, each word cutting deeper than the last. This means a lot to Lauren. You're not mad, right? You're always working so hard. I parked in my driveway and sat in the car for a few minutes, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Then without a second thought, I marched into the house, pulled out my laptop, and logged into every travel account I'd used to book the trip. Hotel reservations? Canceled. Tours? Refunded. Airline upgrades? Nope. I stared at the confirmation emails piling up in my inbox, feeling the tightness in my chest start to ease. They wanted to take Lauren instead of me? Fine. But they wouldn't be staying in five-star hotels or enjoying private tours on my dime. When I closed my laptop, a sense of satisfaction settled over me. They could explain themselves to the front desk staff in Paris. I was done being their doormat. The calls started as soon as their flight landed. My phone buzzed repeatedly as I unpacked my suitcase, the one I'd packed so carefully for a trip that was no longer mine. The irony wasn't lost on me as I hung up my dresses and neatly placed my shoes back on the shelf. The buzzing continued, filling the room with its relentless vibration. I sighed, picking up the phone and glancing at the screen. My mom's name flashed across it, accompanied by several missed calls and texts. I unlocked the phone and scrolled through the messages. Violet, what's going on? The hotel won't let us check in. The reservation is missing. Call me immediately. Violet, this isn't funny. Fix this now. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Fix this? They really thought I'd swoop in and save the day after what they'd done? The phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Lauren. I let it ring out, only for her to leave a voicemail. Violet, this is so petty, she snapped, her voice dripping with entitlement. We're stuck here because of you. You need to call the hotel and fix it, now. I rolled my eyes and deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. For years I'd been their fixer, the one who smoothed over every mistake and picked up every slack. Not anymore. Eventually, I decided to answer, if only to stop the barrage of calls. My mom's voice hit me like a tidal wave of anger as soon as I picked up. Violet, what did you do? The hotel says the reservation was canceled and none of the tours are booked anymore. I let her rant for a moment, then calmly replied, I canceled them. There was a long, stunned silence before she hissed, Why would you do that? Oh, I don't know, I said, my tone laced with sarcasm. Maybe because you decided to take Lauren on my trip. You're lucky I even drove you to the airport. We thought you'd understand, she snapped. Understand what? I asked, my voice rising. That years of saving and planning didn't matter because Lauren needed a break? That my hard work meant nothing to you? Guess what, Mom? I don't understand, and I don't care to. I hung up before she could respond and turned my phone off, tossing it onto the couch. The silence that followed was blissful, and I felt like I could breathe again. If they wanted to prioritize Lauren, fine. But they could figure out the rest of the trip without me. The silence lasted only a day. By the next morning, my phone was buzzing again with calls and messages. At first, I ignored them. I spent the day cleaning the house and catching up on work, but curiosity got the better of me by evening. I opened my phone and braced myself for the storm of texts. From my mom, Violet, you've gone too far. Your sister is in tears and your father is furious. We can't get into any of the hotels you booked. From Lauren, you're acting like a child. I don't get why you're making this such a big deal. Just fix it already. And finally from my dad, we need to talk, this isn't right. I set the phone down, shaking my head. For years, I'd been the one to fix things, to make sure everyone was comfortable and happy. Now that I'd taken a step back, they didn't know how to handle it. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat down at the kitchen table, letting the anger simmer. How dare they expect me to clean up their mess? How dare they act like I was the one in the wrong? The next call came minutes later, and this time I answered. Violet, my mom barked before I could say a word. This isn't funny anymore. We're stranded. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? I took a slow sip of my tea. Embarrassing? You think this is embarrassing? Try saving for years, planning every detail, and then being told you're not even part of the trip you paid for. Stop being dramatic, she snapped. Lauren needed this more than you. And now she can figure it out, I said firmly. You made your decision, Mom. You wanted to take Lauren instead of me? Fine, but don't expect me to fund her vacation. We're family, she hissed. We don't do this to each other. I let out a bitter laugh. Funny, I was just thinking the same thing. Lauren's voice came through the background, whining, "Mom, just hang up on her. She's being impossible." That was the final straw. "Enjoy your trip," I said, my tone icy. "Oh, wait. You can't, because it's not your trip. It was mine. And now it's nobody's. Goodbye." I hung up before she could respond and turned my phone off again. For the rest of the evening, I felt an odd mix of anger and relief. Anger that they'd put me in this position, but relief that I'd finally stood up for myself. They could call me dramatic all they wanted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't letting them take advantage of me. The next few days were blissfully quiet. With my phone turned off, I finally had space to think clearly, free from the barrage of guilt trips and accusations. I spent my mornings sipping coffee on my back porch, enjoying the calm I'd craved for so long. My afternoons were filled with work and catching up on little projects I'd been putting off, things that reminded me how capable I was when I wasn't bogged down by their endless demands. But by the third day, curiosity got the better of me. I turned my phone back on to find over a dozen voicemails waiting for me. The first few were from my mom, growing increasingly hysterical with each one. "Violet, you need to call me back right now. This has gone too far. I can't believe you're doing this. You've humiliated us. We're your parents. How could you treat us this way?" Then came Lauren's messages, full of the same entitled tone she'd always used. "This is so petty, even for you. You're ruining everything. Just fix it, Violet." And finally my dad's voice, quieter but no less pointed. "Violet, I don't understand what's happened to you. Call us back so we can sort this out." I hesitated before listening to the final voicemail, a long one from my mom. Her voice was quieter this time, tinged with frustration and exhaustion. "Violet," she began, "we're back at the airport now. The trip is ruined, and I hope you're happy with yourself. Your sister is devastated, and your father and I are, well, disappointed doesn't even begin to cover it. Call us when you're ready to talk." I deleted the voicemails without replying. I wasn't ready to talk, and honestly, I didn't know if I ever would be. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was the culmination of years of them putting Lauren first and expecting me to accept it with a smile. As the hours passed, I found myself reflecting on all the times I'd been overlooked or dismissed. Every holiday where Lauren's whims dictated the plans. Every family gathering where my accomplishments were treated as afterthoughts. This trip had been the breaking point, but the cracks had been forming for years. That evening, Grace stopped by unannounced, carrying 2 cups of coffee and an unmistakable look of curiosity. "I heard about what happened," she said, setting the coffee on the table. "Your mom called me yesterday." Of course she had. My mom had always been good at recruiting allies when she wanted to guilt me into compliance. "And?" I asked, taking a sip. Grace shrugged, a sly smile creeping across her face. "I told her you were probably busy and would get back to her when you were ready." I laughed, shaking my head. "You're the best." "No, you're the best," she said, her tone suddenly serious. "Because you finally stood up for yourself. I know how hard that is, Violet. Don't let them drag you back down." Her words stuck with me long after she left. Grace was right. I'd spent too long bending over backward to please people who never seemed to care about my efforts. It was time to break that cycle, once and for all. By the time the weekend rolled around, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The anger was still there, simmering under the surface, but it was joined by something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Freedom from their endless expectations. Freedom from being the family's fixer. Freedom to finally live on my own terms. But as expected, the silence didn't last. It was Sunday afternoon when I finally got a call that I decided to answer. This time, it was my dad. "Violet," he began, his voice heavy with weariness. "Your mom wanted me to call. She thinks you'll listen to me." "Go on," I said, leaning back in my chair. He let out a sigh. "Look, This has all gotten out of hand. Your mom's upset, Lauren's furious, and, well, it's just a mess. But you're better than this. I stiffened, his words igniting a fresh wave of anger. Better than what, Dad? Standing up for myself? Refusing to let you walk all over me again? That's not what I meant, he said quickly. It's just, you've always been the reasonable one. The one who keeps everything together. This isn't like you. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. You're right, it's not like me. Because I'm not bending over backward to clean up your mess. He paused, and for a moment I thought he might finally see my side of things. But then he said, You're punishing the whole family over one decision. Is that really fair? Fair? I repeated, my voice rising. You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when you and Mom decided I wasn't important enough to be part of the trip I planned? Was it fair when you replaced me with Lauren like I didn't matter? That's not what we were trying to do, he said, his tone defensive now. We just thought Lauren needed it more. Of course you did, I snapped. You always think she needs more attention, more support, more of everything, and I'm always the one expected to sacrifice for her, not anymore. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, he said, I don't know what you want me to say. I don't need you to say anything, I replied, my voice steady. I just need you to understand that I'm done being the afterthought. From now on, I come first. Violet. Goodbye, Dad. I ended the call and set the phone down, my hands trembling. For the rest of the day, I let myself feel everything. Anger, sadness, relief. It wasn't easy, but it felt like the start of something new. I wasn't the family's fixer anymore, and I wasn't going to be. They could figure out how to clean up their own messes. When my parents and Lauren finally returned, I was waiting for them at their house. I'd parked in their driveway, sipping coffee and feeling surprisingly calm as I watched their taxi pull up. As they stepped out, dragging their suitcases behind them, their faces were a mix of exhaustion and irritation. Lauren was the first to speak. Well, I hope you're happy, Violet. I raised an eyebrow, staying seated on the porch swing. Happy about what? Our trip was a disaster, my mom snapped, waving her hand as if to brush the whole thing away. We spent the entire week staying in dingy hotels and eating terrible food because we couldn't afford anything decent. And don't get me started on the tours, Lauren chimed in, crossing her arms. Oh, wait, there weren't any. Do you know how embarrassing it was to show up and be told there was no reservation? I took another sip of coffee, letting their complaints wash over me. Sounds rough, I said finally, my voice calm. But you wanted to take Lauren, remember? I'm sure you all had some great bonding time. That's not the point, my mom shot back, her voice rising. You knew we couldn't afford all the things you'd planned. You set us up to fail. And I stood up, setting my mug down on the small table next to me. No, Mom, I didn't set you up for anything. I planned a trip for the three of us. Something special I'd been saving for years. You're the ones who decided to cut me out at the last second. My dad finally spoke up, his tone quieter but no less accusatory. You didn't have to cancel everything, Violet. That was extreme. Was it? I asked, folding my arms. Why should I have paid for a trip I wasn't even invited to? If Lauren needed it so badly, you should have planned it yourselves. You are lucky that I didn't cancel the return flight. Lauren rolled her eyes. You're so dramatic. It's just money, Violet. And you're so entitled, I shot back, my patience finally snapping. Do you have any idea how much work and sacrifice went into planning that trip? Or do you just assume things magically appear for you because someone else takes care of it? They stood there, stunned into silence for a moment. I've spent years being the responsible one, I continued, my voice steady but firm. The one who fixes things, plans things, makes sure everything runs smoothly, and you've spent just as long taking it all for granted. That's not fair, my mom started, but I held up a hand to stop her. No, Mom, what's not fair is how you treated me. You chose Lauren over me, like always. So I chose to stop being your doormat. You didn't want me on the trip? Fine. but you don't get to enjoy the benefits of my hard work without me. I grabbed my bag from the porch swing and turned to leave. I'm glad you're back safely, but don't expect things to go back to the way they were. I'm done. As I walked to my car, I heard them calling after me, their voices a mix of anger and guilt. But I didn't look back. The drive home from my parents' house felt strangely peaceful. For years, every visit had left me emotionally drained, but this time I felt lighter. I'd finally said everything I'd been holding in, and for once, I wasn't worried about their reaction. When I got back to my house, I made a cup of tea and sat on the couch, replaying the confrontation in my head. They'd been so sure I'd fold, that I'd give in like always. But watching their stunned faces as I walked away was a reminder of how much I'd changed. They could be angry, hurt, or embarrassed. It didn't matter anymore. I was done living my life to meet their expectations. The next day, I got a call from Grace. "How'd it go?" she asked, not bothering with pleasantries. I laughed, leaning back against the kitchen counter. "Exactly like you'd imagine. They're furious, Lauren's pouting, and Mom is probably trying to figure out how to guilt me back into line." Grace let out a snort. "Let her try. You've got a backbone now, and I'm here to make sure it stays in place." I grinned, grateful for her unwavering support. "Thanks, Grace. I mean it. You've been my rock through all of this." "Anytime," she said, her voice softening. "So what's next for you, now that you're not playing family fixer anymore?" That question had been circling in my mind since the confrontation. What was next? For years, so much of my energy had been poured into trying to please my family, trying to earn their approval. Now that I'd let go of that burden, the possibilities felt endless, and a little intimidating. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I feel like I get to decide. Not them, not anyone else. Just me." "Sounds like the start of something amazing," Grace said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Over the next few weeks, I started making small changes that felt big in their own way. I redecorated my living room, swapping out the hand-me-down furniture from my parents for pieces that felt uniquely mine. I spent weekends exploring local cafes and parks, things I'd always meant to do but never made time for. And I started journaling, writing down my thoughts and dreams without filtering them through the lens of what anyone else might think. Each small step felt like reclaiming a part of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost. One evening, I sat down with my laptop and opened the spreadsheet I'd used to plan the trip. The canceled reservations stared back at me, and I didn't feel a pang of regret. Instead, I felt a surge of determination. That money had been meant for a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and I wasn't going to let it go to waste. Closing the spreadsheet, I opened a new browser tab and typed "solo travel ideas." A few weeks after my parents' return, I booked a solo trip to Italy. It wasn't the same itinerary I'd planned for them, and it wasn't about proving a point anymore. This was for me, a chance to celebrate my independence and finally put myself first. The moment I landed in Rome, I felt a surge of excitement and nervousness. I'd never traveled alone before, but as I stepped out of the airport and into the bustling city, I knew I'd made the right decision. I spent my days wandering cobblestone streets, marveling at ancient ruins and indulging in meals at charming little cafes. There was no schedule, no one else to consider, just me and the freedom to do exactly what I wanted. One afternoon, while sitting on the Spanish steps with a gelato in hand, I pulled out the journal I'd brought with me. For years, I'd written about what I wanted to achieve, but those dreams were always wrapped up in making someone else happy. Now, as I wrote, the focus shifted. Learn a new language, start a small business, travel to at least 5 more countries. The list grew, each goal a reflection of the life I wanted to create, not the one I'd been expected to live. On my last night in Florence, I had dinner at a small family-run restaurant overlooking the Arno River. As I watched the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, I felt a deep sense of peace. This trip had been more than just a vacation, it was a turning point. I'd spent so much of my life trying to earn my family's approval, but here, thousands of miles away, I realized something important. I didn't need it. I was enough, just as I was. When I returned home, my parents tried to reach out again, this time with softer tones and carefully worded messages. "Hope you had a nice trip," one text from my mom read. "Maybe we can all talk soon?" I stared at the message for a moment before setting my phone down. I wasn't ready to reply, and that was okay. This time, it would be on my terms. As I unpacked my suitcase and placed souvenirs on my shelves, I felt a sense of pride. A week after returning from my trip, I received a call from my mom. This time I answered. "Hi, Violet," she began, her tone unusually soft. "How was your trip?" "It was amazing," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "That's good to hear," she said, pausing as if searching for the right words. "We've been thinking a lot about what happened. Maybe we handled things poorly." The admission surprised me, but I wasn't ready to let her off the hook just yet. "Poorly? You replaced me on a trip I planned and paid for without even asking. Poorly is an understatement." "I know," she said quietly. "Your dad and we didn't realize how much it would hurt you." "And Lauren?" I asked. "Does she feel bad too, or is she still blaming me for ruining her vacation?" "She's upset," my mom admitted. "But I think she knows she could have handled things better." I sighed, leaning against the counter. "Mom, this wasn't just about the trip. It's about years of putting her first and expecting me to pick up the slack. I'm not doing it anymore." "I understand," she said after a moment. "We're going to try to do better. We don't want to lose you." Her words tugged at something deep inside me, but I'd learned enough not to let guilt dictate my choices. "I'm glad to hear that," I said. "But it's going to take more than words to fix this. I need to see real effort, not just apologies." "You will," she promised. "We'll give you the space you need, but I hope you'll let us back in someday." After the call, I felt a mix of emotions: relief that they were finally acknowledging their behavior, and skepticism about whether they'd actually change. But as I sat down with my journal that evening, I realized something important. Whether or not they changed wasn't my responsibility. Over the following months, I kept my boundaries firm. I responded to their calls and texts when I felt like it, but I didn't go out of my way to fix things or smooth over conflicts. Instead, I focused on building the life I wanted. I signed up for a photography class, something I'd always dreamed of doing but never had the time or energy for. I joined a local hiking group and even started planning my next solo trip. Each step I took felt like reclaiming another part of myself. One day, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I realized how far I'd come. I wasn't the person who bent over backward for people who didn't appreciate me. I was someone who valued herself, who set boundaries, and who wasn't afraid to stand up for what she deserved. I felt truly free.